By the way, I want to just continue to roll on without any kind of a break here. If you need to take one, you're welcome to. And if you don't, well, need to. I'm going to skip over pay and productivity for a minute. I want to move right to discrimination. And then I want to go into inequality. And we'll come back to pay and productivity and labor unions. Labor unions you just went through fairly recently. There shouldn't be a lot of question there, but I want to answer some that might exist. Okay. Discrimination. Again, this is where I think the picture is extraordinarily valuable. By the way, in the monopsony equation or scenario, we didn't have labor demand, right? We said that if it were a competitive market, which monopsony is not, then labor demand and MRPFL would be the same curve. But we didn't have labor demand. So we don't equilibrate labor demand and labor supply. We don't find W star and L star that way. We equilibrate MRPFL and MEFL, right? Because the monopsony firm doesn't have to think about equilibration of demand and supply. To hire the number of workers they want to hire, because they're the only firm around. And nobody else is going to hire the others, right? In the most obtuse case. Because they're not subject to that competitive market condition, but they're still profit maximizers. So they're going to hire the number of workers at which MRPFL equals MEFL, which is similar to marginal revenue equaling marginal cost in general economics. Okay. Are discriminatory firms, are they profit maximizers?
They're utility maximizers.
They're utility maximizers, exactly. Because of that, I'm not going to bother with MEFL. Okay? I have an MRPFL relationship for the type of worker that's represented in this model. Let's say that this is a moderately skilled administrative worker of some kind. Okay? And I happen to be in an area where some of those people are white and some of those people are black. And please don't misunderstand me. I don't use those terms to suggest any preconception on my part or predilection on my part. I'm simply using the convention within labor economics as we talk about discrimination. We talk about male and female, we talk about black and white. We all recognize it goes way beyond that. But those are just the words we use generalizing. Okay? So in this case, how do I decide how many I hire and what I'm going to do and what I'm going to pay them? And where do I see the discrimination? Darren, where do I see discrimination here? Okay, London, can you see it?
Probably be the MRPLO line.
Okay, there's something else. You're right, that's included. What else?
Probably where the lines meet up, right?
Not so much where the lines meet up. Think about this. This MRPFL represents your ability to produce in the kind of environments we have for modestly skilled administrative workers. But this line represents my demand for you if I'm that employer, right? My demand is to the left or at lesser values than your productivity, such that we can see that your productivity is not what I'm paying you for. I'm paying you based upon some other perverse incentive, structure, or satisfaction that I've got. And as it turns out, I have a labor demand for your kind of worker. Young, fair-skinned, reddishy kind of hair, got the baseball cap going backwards there, your kind of worker, okay? And so I'm going to hire this number of your kind. Don, how do I decide how much I'm going to pay them?
I'll just go straight across.
Yeah. I was born tonight, but not last night, man. I'm going to pay them here. I'm going to mark it as star, but it's a discriminatory star, right? I'm going to pay them here because that's what that number of workers requires to be paid if I'm employing that number of workers. Ryan, how much could I pay them?
You could pay them anywhere up to the point where...
How do I see how much I could pay?
Yeah, it would be the gap between where you have W star and where that same point would intersect.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this number of L, whatever that number is, I'm going to put it into my MRP of L equation, because remember, it included two variables, MRP of L and L. So I put L into it, whatever this number is, it's going to give me some value of MRP of L. And that's how much I'm going to earn off of them. That's how much I'm going to pay them. We might even suppose that if I were not a discriminatory employer, this would be W star, right? Because LD wouldn't be down here, it would be here. It would be synonymous with MRP of L if I wasn't discriminatory. In which case, I could be paying more. I could be paying here somewhere, because it looks like that's going to come across. But I see that here, I'm making something off of them, I'm paying them something, such that my MRP of L is greater than my WD star. Can I see an efficiency wage scenario develop here like I could see in monopsony?
Space in between.
Kind of looks like I could, right? Because I've got this exact same gap where my marginal revenue product of labor is greater than what I'm paying. But we don't see it there because this and this are not functions of seeking profitability, are not functions of seeking greater utility on the part of my workers. They're a function of my own perverse incentives. I don't like your kind. Okay. What kinds of discrimination are there?
Race,
Racial,
Gender.
different skins,
gender,
gender,
age.
yeah. Let's stop with gender for a minute. Used to be very simple, male and female, right? Is it as simple today? It's a little more complex. Don't forget that. Okay? What else? Is discrimination always coming to the worker from the firm?
No.
No. Darren, you and I work for the same company. And I sadly realize you don't like old white guys. You know, and in fact, you keep putting me down. You did everything you could to keep me from having that promotion that I deserved, man. I'm tired of it. But you're bigger and meaner than I am. There's not much I can do about it because I'm intimidated and I'll get out. Okay. Were it not for my buddy Chad here, I'd be really proud of him. And frankly, and Dom's got my back. Dom's big enough. I don't worry about anything else. You see what I'm saying here? There's another model we can use for this. Wage for the female class or disadvantaged class. Again, I'm talking about typical convention. Versus wage for the male class. Such that this is going to be greater than, equal to, or less than 1. When that number is equal to 1, whatever the wage paid to females and the wage paid to males is, when you put in a quotient like that, when it's equal to 1, do we observe discrimination? No. Both genders are being paid the same wage, presumably for the same job. We don't see discrimination. I guess there could be some discrimination represented attitudinally, but if your paycheck's big enough, do you really care? Maybe not. You probably still do, but not as much. If that number is less than 1, who's being discriminated against?
The females.
Right. Because it means if the number is less than 1, the numerator is smaller than the denominator. Okay, assuming they have similar productivities, which is a base assumption for discrimination. And that means females are being paid less than males to do the same job. Discrimination, maybe, right? If the number is greater than 1, who's being discriminated against? Would suggest males, right? Do we typically think that? No, we don't. My sense is that if we have this discussion 20 years from now when I'm in my 80s and you guys finally are adults, that maybe at that point, that was a joke by the way. Thank you. Even Darren was about to come get me. So at that point, 20 years from now, my guess is there will be more of that kind of a discussion. Do we see some of it today? We see some of it. Pockets, insignificant numerically, we're beginning to see it, right? Because people I don't care how good they are, tend to prefer that which they are most comfortable with. And sometimes you're most comfortable with your own. Okay? Not saying this right, just saying it's a natural inclination sometimes. And when it gets out of hand is when people have been schooled to be that way. This stuff doesn't come naturally. You're not born as a discriminator. So remember that this is relevant, and we have a model form that looks like this, in which we have the WFWM relation on the y-axis, and we have some number on the x-axis, and it might be number of workers, and it might be number of firms, it just depends. And if we see that this is 1, and we see that that is our curve, then this would suggest that, let's say that this is number of employees, number of workers down here, let's say it's L, that in the marketplace that this is representing, there are some non-discriminatory firms, right? Such that the wage they pay the females and the wage they pay the males, the same wage, such that we're at 1 for that quotient. But beyond that number of workers, those additional workers are subject to working for discriminatory firms, such that there is some lower quotient representing some discrimination. Think about this. Mobility is the solution to monopsony. Is mobility conceptually a solution to discrimination?
To some level.
I think so, right? Assuming that it's discrimination that we can get beyond. That there are places, firms, and or polities, parts of the country or world, in which that type of discrimination doesn't exist. Okay? I don't know if any of you have ever felt discriminated against. I happen to find myself in the ghettos of old Syracuse, New York, many years ago, in which a guy that I was living with, another white guy that I was living with, we were both in our early 20s at the time, were the only 2 Caucasians for many blocks that we were aware of. Oh, we saw white people driving their cars on the main road, but we never saw other white people. And there were a couple of situations in which we found ourselves in which we knew we were discriminated against because of how we were treated by the other people who were living there. It was really interesting. I'd never felt discriminated. I'd never felt even the other side of discrimination. I was born and raised near San Francisco, where race didn't mean anything to me, and it was at a time where gender had begun to mean very little as well. I mean, sexual attraction kind of gender, yeah, but I mean just gender in a real sense. And I'd never experienced it. I found myself in this part of Syracuse, New York, living in an old tenement building, and I was socially acceptable to a very small part of the population. It was a really interesting feeling. I didn't like it. It gave me some empathy for other people that I know that have felt it just the opposite. All right. Talk to me about pay and productivity for a minute. Upon what basis should a worker be paid? London? Upon what basis should a worker be paid if we're in a competitive labor market?
Based off their productivity.
End of story, right? And you might say, well, wait, they should be paid based upon labor demand. And my response is going to be, in a competitive market, labor demand and marginal revenue product of labor, productivity, are the same thing. Easy. But, as it turns out, with everything else in this class, it's easy and it's not. Brennan, I'm going to pull you into this discussion. And we're going to say that you're taking a new job. And it's a company you haven't worked for before. It's an industry you've not worked in. And it's a job you've never had, but you are qualified for it. Maybe it's your first job out of college. Okay? A recruiter, human resource person of some kind, was doing interviewing. There was ads in the newspaper or on Craigslist or LinkedIn or who knows however you found it or they found you. When you first go to work there, not only are you not productive, you're going through training, you're doing through the HR onboarding, but somebody else Saul is going to have to train you. He's going to have to take some of her productivity. What does your MRP of L curve look like in that scenario I just painted? Let's assume that here we are in time and MRP of L or wage space. What's your curve look like? Okay, so it's upward sloping. Does it start in the positive territory or does it start in the negative territory?
Negative.
I think so. In fact, my guess is it probably looks something more like that. Okay? Upward sloping. Oh, it's possible that it's linear. And in fact, more often than not, if you see an equation for it in this course, it's going to be a linear equation. Because we don't use a lot of nonlinear equations. But my guess is it looks like this. And this is your MRP of L curve. And the longer you're with the employer, the more productive you get, and at some point you start to flatten out. Because you can only be so productive at the job that you have. You're the employer, Ryan. You're going to employ Bryn. You going to be able to get her for a negative wage?
No.
Not so much with that, right? She got some pride.
Yeah.
Okay, pride? Economics, right? Got a little bit of pride. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to guess that there's somewhere in here a wage curve as well. What's the wage curve look like?
The wage curve would
It ascends and then flattens out.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say that the wage curve probably comes here. Something like that, right? I don't want it to go down. I want it flat. Okay. And I'm going to say that this is a competitive market for this kind of worker. But we've just suggested a competitive market in which the wage and the MRP of L are not the same number to begin with. How can I do that? Because doesn't that fly in the face of what we've been talking about with perfect competition? These things all look like, and I make them sound like they all line up instantly in time, right? There's no temporal displacement here. But the fact of the matter is there is some temporal displacement. In this scenario, yes, we do have a point here where we've got a T star and an MRP of L equals W. But before that point, the worker's productivity is less than their wage. After that point, the productivity is greater than the wage. And the firm was okay with this, right? Under what conditions would you be okay with this, Ryan?
that I eventually recouped what I had initially lost from paying her a higher wage when she was productive.
You're okay if the relationship lasts long enough to get out here, and I'm just going to say it's T question mark, lasts long enough such that the area between these two curves is the same as the area between these two curves. Because these are numeric, these are currency related, right? And when this area, which represents loss, is equaled by this area, which represents gain, you're finally whole. And for the average experience, MRP of L and W are the same thing. If Bryn has no hope of getting here, do we have a competitive marketplace? We don't. But if she has an expectation of getting here, and then lingering here for some period, maybe this is about when she gets promoted, maybe this is when you start to train other people, okay? So even though we act like all of these things are very finite and they happen nice and neat in instant time frames, they don't. There's time that these things take place, okay? This is an equilibrium